The night was dark. The wind howled like angry spirits, and in a tiny mud hut, the cry of a newborn pierced the air like a curse. The old midwife, her back bent like a bow, stared at the lifeless young woman who had just given her last breath to bring the child into the world. She spat on the ground and shook her head. Another cursed child with no mother. Better to leave her for the vultures, she muttered, her wrinkled hands trembling as she looked at the baby wrapped in rags thinner than cobwebs. Just as she was about to drop the crying child on the cold floor, a tall shadow filled the doorway. It was Madame Kedji, known in the village as a woman with a sharp tongue and a heart made of stone. "Give me the child," Madame Kedji said, her voice firm, carrying no room for argument. The midwife squinted at her. "You already have a daughter, Madame Kedji. Do you want to starve another mouth? Look at you, barely surviving yourself. I said, give me the child," Madame Kedji snapped. Her voice was like a whip, and the midwife, knowing her reputation, quickly placed the baby in her arms. Madame Kedji looked down at the tiny face, so helpless, so innocent, so unwanted. She pressed the child against her chest, but if anyone thought it was out of love, they didn't know Madame Kedji. She didn't take the baby because of pity. She took her because fate played a wicked joke, and Madame Kedji loved to laugh at fate. She named the child Adana and carried her to her one-room hut, where her own daughter, Bisi, snored loudly under a raffia mat. Adana grew up thinking Madame Kedji was her real mother. She worked her fingers to the bone, scrubbing, sweeping, cooking, fetching water while Bisi painted her nails with red dye and giggled with her friends outside. Still, Adana obeyed, loved, and never complained. But fate, oh fate, loves to stir trouble. By the time the girls reached womanhood, Adana's beauty was like fire in the night. Her skin was smooth and dark like polished ebony. Her eyes shone like candlelight, and her long hair fell like flowing silk. Villagers whispered whenever she passed. "Is she really Madame Kedji's child? She looks nothing like her." Of course, this whispering was sweet poison in Bisi's ears. She who once preened like a peacock in the village square suddenly found herself ignored. The boys who once praised her hips and smile now stumbled over their words just to glance at Adana. Even Kunle, the wealthy trader's son Bisi secretly dreamt of, could not take his eyes off Adana. And Bisi hated her for it. Hate? No, it was worse. It was like fire in her chest that burned hotter every day. One evening, after Adana had washed a mountain of clothes and her hands were shriveled like old yam peel, she heard whispers in the kitchen. She tiptoed and pressed her ear to the cracked wall. "Adana's not even your real daughter. And she's feeling herself as if she belongs," Bisi hissed. Adana froze. "You picked her up like a stray goat, and she stole my beauty and taking my spot at every opportunity. She doesn't belong here, Mama. She's just a burden." Madame Kedji gave a long, tired sigh. "You're right. I should have left her that night. Sometimes I regret bringing her here." Adana's world shattered in that moment. "So I was picked up like a stray goat." Tears rolled down her face. The only mother she had ever known wasn't her mother, and she was just discovering. After that night, everything changed. The mask came off. Madame Kedji, Adana, was treated worse than a slave. She ate cold scraps after everyone else had eaten, wore torn rags while Bisi dressed in fine wrappers, and worked until her back nearly broke. Then came the knife in her chest, the betrayal. One morning, Madame Kedji called Adana outside, her face colder than morning dew. "You are getting married," she said. Adana blinked. "Married? To who?" "To Sei," Madame Kedji replied. Adana's jaw dropped. Everyone in the village knew Sei, the lame fisherman who lived in a leaking hut by the riverbank. A man the children mocked, a man the villagers called half man, half shadow. Adana fell on her knees. "Please, Mama." Madame Keji slapped her so hard, stars danced before her eyes. "Don't you dare call me Mama. You are nothing to me. You will marry Sei tomorrow. You will leave this house and never come back. Do you understand?" From the doorway, Bisi smirked, her eyes glittering with triumph. The next day, there was no music, no dancing, no wedding dress. No one blessed her union. Adana was simply dumped like cheap goods into Sei's hands. Madame Keji shut her door, Bisi laughed, and the villagers whispered, "The beautiful one is now the wife of a beggar." Sei led Adana to his small hut. The roof leaked, the floor was cold, the wooden bed creaked. It smelled of fish and damp wood. "This is your home now," he said quietly. Adana's throat tightened. From Madame Keji's cruelty to this prison of poverty, was this her destiny? Sei laid a mat on the ground. "You will sleep here." She stared at him, shocked. She had feared the worst. But instead of touching her, he turned away and slept on his creaky bed. That night, Adana curled on the mat, tears soaking her ragged pillow. The wind howled through the cracks in the hut, the same way loneliness howled in her chest. Morning brought no comfort. As she stepped outside, the women of the village were already waiting, their mouths sharper than knives. "Look at her! The beauty queen married to a half-man," one laughed. "Does she even have Gary to feed her?" another added. They burst into cruel laughter. And then, like poison on sugarcane, Bisi arrived. She wore fine clothes, her skin oiled and glowing, her lips curved in mockery. "Sister," she said sweetly, "how's married life? Have you started eating fish heads already?" Adana clenched her fists, but said nothing. Bisi leaned close, her voice a dagger. "Be grateful someone wanted you. No man of worth would marry a thrown-away child like you." The women laughed again, their voices echoing in Adana's chest. But this time, she didn't cry. She lifted her chin, turned, and walked away, because deep down, she knew life had not finished writing her story. A moment later, Adana sat by the river, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. She touched her face, sighed and whispered to herself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I really am nothing." The water rippled as if to laugh at her misery. She wasn't in Madame Keji's house anymore, but somehow the cruelty of life had followed her like a stubborn shadow. Being married to Sei, the poor fisherman with a limp, wasn't a dream. It was survival. She swept his leaking hut, fetched water till her bones ached, cooked what little she could, and forced herself to sleep on a mat that smelled like damp firewood. It was not easy, but at least she wasn't under Madame Keji's roof, eating scraps while Bisi licked oil from her fingers. That was the only consolation. One hot afternoon, Adana staggered under the weight of a basket of yams from the market. The load was too heavy for her slim arms, and before she knew it, her legs buckled. The basket slipped, yams rolling across the ground like scattered stones. The women nearby clapped their hands and burst into laughter. Look at her," one shouted. "So pretty yet still useless. Can beauty cook soup?" Another one shook her head dramatically. "She left Madame Keji's house only to become the shame of the village. Ah, God, what a waste!" Their laughter stabbed her ears. Adana bent quickly, trying to gather the yams before more humiliation poured on her, but then a strong hand reached down. She froze. When she looked up, it was Sei. Quiet, calm, with that mysterious look in his eyes that made her chest tighten. He picked up the scattered yams one by one, without uttering a word, placed them gently back in the basket, and handed it to her. Adana expected him to mock her too, to laugh like everyone else, but instead he looked at her with a softness she had never known. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said simply. Those words hit her harder than Madame Keji's slaps ever did. For the first time in her life, someone spoke to her not with hatred, not with mockery, but with care. Something shifted inside her, like a locked door opening just a crack. Later that evening, Adana sat outside the hut, watching the sun sink into the horizon. Her stomach rumbled so loudly, she was sure the whole world could hear it. Sei, who had been sharpening a knife silently, looked at her. He didn't ask, he just stood, disappeared inside the hut, and came back with a small wooden bowl. "Eat," he said, placing it beside her. She looked at the food, just boiled yam and palm oil, nothing fancy, but to her empty stomach, it was a royal feast. Still, she hesitated. "What about you?" she asked quietly. "I already ate," he shrugged. But Adana's eyes caught the truth. There was no second plate. He had lied. He gave her the only food they had. Tears threatened to spill, but she quickly blinked them away. She picked up the bowl and ate, each bite filling not just her belly, but a hollow space in her chest that had been empty since the day she was born. Days passed, and hunger gnawed at her again. One morning, as she dragged a bucket from the well, her legs trembled, her vision blurred. The bucket slipped from her hands, crashing to the ground. Before she could steady herself, the world spun like a top, and darkness swallowed her. When she opened her eyes again, she wasn't on her mat. She was on Sei's wooden bed. A cool cloth rested on her forehead. Her body burned with fever. Beside her, Sei sat, his face shadowed with worry. "You fainted," he said simply. I'm sorry," she whispered weakly, trying to sit up. "Don't move," he ordered, his voice firmer than she'd ever heard it. "You're burning." He lifted her head carefully and pressed a clay bowl to her lips. "Drink." She tasted the warm herbal mixture, bitter yet strangely comforting. Her chest tightened as she realized no one, not Madame Keji, not Bisi, not even the midwife who delivered her, had ever cared for her like this. That night, Sei stayed awake, changing the cloth on her forehead, keeping the fire alive, and watching over her like a guardian. In her fever haze, Adana's mind whispered, "Why is he so kind? Who exactly is this man the villagers call useless?" She was still recovering when her nightmare walked through the door. "Bisi." She wrinkled her nose immediately. "Ah, so this is where you live," she sneered, scanning the tiny hut. "Even goats have better homes than this. Honestly, I don't know how you survive here." Adana gripped the edge of the bed, her lips pressed tight. Bisi dropped a basket dramatically on the floor. "Mother sent food," she said sweetly. Inside was warm bread, dried fish and vegetables. Adana's stomach twisted with hunger. But before she could touch it, Bisi snatched it back. "Oh, silly me," she said with a smirk. "This isn't for you. It's for me. I just wanted you to see what you're missing." She tore a piece of bread, chewed slowly, exaggerating each bite. So soft, unlike the rotten yam you eat here." Adana swallowed hard, humiliation burning through her. But she didn't speak. And then Sei walked in. His eyes scanned the room. He saw the food, saw Adana's trembling hands, saw Bisi's mocking smile. Something cold and sharp flickered across his face. "Leave," he said flatly. Bisi raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "He heard me," he repeated, his voice like steel. "Take your food and leave." Bisi scoffed, flipping her hair. "How dare you talk to me like that? Do you know who I am?" Sei stepped closer, his limp forgotten. His voice dropped, commanding, "I know exactly who you are. A woman who feeds on another's pain, but not here, not in my house." For the first time, Bisi's smirk faltered. She stared at him, really stared, and something unsettled her. This was no ordinary beggar. There was a presence in him, a quiet authority that made her spine tingle. Without another word, she grabbed her basket and stormed out. Adana turned to him, stunned. Her heart pounded in her chest. No one had ever defended her like that. "Who are you, Seyi?" she whispered. Seyi stared at her for a moment before leaving the room without saying a word. Adana sat alone, staring at the cracked mud walls of the hut like someone staring at a prison. Her stomach growled again, loud enough for even the rats to mock her. Hunger had become her closest friend. She chuckled bitterly to herself. So this is my fate? Madame Keji and her darling Bissy threw me away like rotten leftovers, and now I'm here, married off to a limping fisherman. God, is this supposed to be a reward for all my suffering? She pressed her knees to her chest. The night was already thick with cold, and loneliness pressed down like a heavy blanket. Just as she was about to lie down on her mat, the door creaked open. Seyi stepped in. He wasn't carrying his usual fishing net. Instead, he dropped a small bundle on the floor beside her mat. Adana blinked. "What's that?" "Open it," he said, his voice calm as usual. The fingers trembled as she untied the cloth. The smell hit her first. Warm bread, roasted fish, and a flask of fresh palm wine. Adana gasped. Where did you get this?" she whispered, like someone afraid of good news. Seyi shrugged, expression unreadable. "You haven't eaten properly in days." Her throat tightened. The last time anyone cared about her hunger was when she was still a little girl, before Madame Keji turned her into the family's punching bag, before Bissy made a sport out of humiliating her. Tears welled up. She picked up the bread, but just as she was about to eat, she stopped. Her eyes went to him. "Did you eat?" Seyi smirked. "I'm not the one who fainted like a weak chicken yesterday." Her lips parted, something twisted in her chest. Slowly, she broke the bread into 2 halves and stretched one piece toward him. "Please, eat with me," he hesitated, then sat beside her. For the first time since this cursed marriage began, they ate together. No words, just silence. But this silence wasn't heavy with pain. It was gentle, like the sound of rain after a long drought. That night, the wind roared through the cracks of the hut like angry spirits. Adana lay on her bed, shivering, clutching her thin wrapper. From the wooden bed, Seyi watched her. Without a word, he stood, walked over, and placed a thick cloth over her trembling body. Adana froze. "Seyi, you don't have to—" "You'll catch another fever," he interrupted flatly, walking back to his bed. Her throat burned. She clutched the cloth, not because it was warm, but because for the first time, someone who owed her nothing had shown her care, something her so-called family never gave her. For the first time in years, Adana slept deeply. For the first time, she dreamed of something other than sorrow. The next morning, Adana went to the river to fetch water, but whispers chased her like shadows. "Did you hear? That poor fisherman bought food yesterday. Expensive food. Where did he get the money? He must have stolen it. I saw him myself. Bread, fish, palm wine. That man is hiding something." Adana's heart pounded. By the time she reached the market, the gossip had spread like wildfire. "Maybe he's not as poor as he pretends," one woman said. "Or maybe he's a thief," another muttered. Adana clenched her fists and rushed home. She found Seyi, as usual, sharpening his knife, his face calm as though the whole village wasn't roasting his name over their gossip fire. "Seyi," she said urgently, "where did you get the food yesterday?" He glanced at her. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it does," she pressed. "People are saying you stole it." He chuckled dryly. "Let them talk. That's free entertainment." Adana frowned. "Seyi, I need to know. Who are you, really?" For a long moment, he looked at her. Then his voice came quietly. "I'm just a man who doesn't want to see his wife suffer." Her heart thudded. She swallowed hard. Something about him wasn't adding up. This man wasn't the useless fisherman the village mocked. He was hiding something. Over a century. Adana sat outside peeling cassava. The setting sun painted the sky orange. She glanced at Shei, sitting quietly at the doorway, lost in thought. His face, bathed in half-light, looked distant, sad. She hesitated, then asked, "Shei, why do you live like this? You could have married anyone, but you chose me, a girl tossed away like scraps. And you never complain, never shout. Why?" Shei's knife stilled in his hand. His chest rose slowly before he answered. "Because I know what it feels like to be abandoned." Adana's breath caught. He looked into the distance, voice heavy with old pain. "I was once a boy who had everything. Food, servants, a father who was one of the richest men around. But the moment I lost my ability to walk properly, I became worthless to them. My father sent me away, ashamed of me." Adana's heart twisted so hard she felt it might break. Shei continued, his tone flat but sharp. "I learned to survive on my own. I worked in places where no one cared if I lived or died, and I discovered something. Poverty doesn't make you worthless, but the world will treat you like it does." Her eyes stung with tears. All these years, she thought her suffering as an adopted child was unique. But here was a man who had been thrown away too, broken by people who should have loved him. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his. He stiffened, surprised. "You are not worthless," she whispered, her voice cracking. For the first time, his eyes softened. He didn't reply, but his fingers tightened gently around hers. At that moment, they were no longer two strangers forced together by cruelty. They were two rejected souls, finally finding comfort in each other. The next morning, Adana woke up to something that almost made her doubt her own ears. Laughter. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Nobody laughed in that hut. The walls only knew silence, sighs, and her occasional muffled sobs. She blinked and stepped outside and froze. Shei was sitting on a low stool, and beside him was a small boy from the village, giggling like he had just been tickled by angels. Shei tossed a carved wooden bird into the air, caught it smoothly with his strong hand, and the boy clapped his tiny palms. Adana just stood there staring. She had never seen Shei's face break into that kind of smile before. Not the crooked smirk he usually carried like a shield. No, this was pure joy. Real, free, alive. And for some reason, that sight hurt her more than all the insults Madame Keji and BC had ever thrown at her. Because here was a man she thought she knew, quiet, distant, bitter. And suddenly, he looked like someone she didn't recognize. Someone who had hidden depths. Then Shei caught her staring. His smile slipped instantly, replaced by that blank, unreadable expression he wore like armor. He cleared his throat, awkward. Adana folded her arms and smirked. "Wow, so you do know how to smile. I was beginning to think your face was allergic to happiness." Shei rubbed the back of his neck. "The boy likes stories. I was just telling him one." Adana knelt down beside the boy, curious. "What story?" The child's eyes sparkled. "A story about a great king who disguised himself as a poor man so he could find a wife who truly loved him." Adana's stomach clenched. She looked quickly at Shei, but his face gave nothing away. Still, her heartbeat raced. Why did that story feel like a riddle meant for her ears alone? That evening, as Adana returned from the river with her clay pot balanced on her head, her steps froze. A familiar figure stood at the hut's entrance, arms crossed, smirk fixed in place. BC. Adana's heart dropped to her stomach. Her stepsister looked her up and down slowly, eyes gleaming with wicked delight. "Well, well, well," BC sneered. "Still here? I thought by now you would have packed your miserable rags and run back to the gutter you came from. But look at you, still playing house with a half-man. How romantic." Adana sighed, too exhausted to argue. "What do you want, BC?" BC pulled something shiny from her wrapper and held it up. Adana's breast caught. The bracelet. Her bracelet. The only thing she had left from her real parents. Her legs nearly gave out. Where did you get that?" she whispered. BC twirled it around her finger, mocking. "Mother found it in your things. She gave it to me, said, and I quote, 'Adana doesn't need something this beautiful. After all, she'll never be more than a fisherman's ragged wife.'" Adana's body shook. "That's mine," she choked out, stepping forward. Bissy's laughter was cruel. "Yours? Nothing in this life is yours. Not family, not love, not even this." And with a dramatic flourish, Bissy flung the bracelet to the muddy ground, then crushed it under her heel. She twisted her foot until the delicate metal bent and cracked. Adana gasped as if Bissy had stomped on her heart. She shoved her aside and scrambled to the ground, scooping the ruined bracelet into her palms. Mud smeared her fingers, tears blurred her eyes. Bissy clapped mockingly. "Look at you crying over trash. Honestly, Adana, you were born pathetic and you'll die pathetic." Before Adana could even reply, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Get out. Sei." He was standing at the doorway, his jaw set, his eyes hard. His whole body radiated authority. Bissy turned slowly, smirk still painted on her lips. "Or what?" she taunted. "What can you do, eh? Limp after me with your stick? You're a half-man. You can't even protect your own wife. Half-body husband." But as Sei stepped forward, something in his stance shifted. His presence filled the space like a storm. For the first time, Bissy's smirk faltered. Fear flickered in her eyes. She scoffed to save face, hissed under her breath and turned on her heels. "Useless people. You deserve each other." Silence fell. Adana was left trembling, clutching the bent bracelet to her chest like it was her last breath. Without a word, Sei came forward. He gently pried the bracelet from her hands, then disappeared inside the hut. Adana sat frozen, confused. Moments later he returned, carrying a soft cloth and a small knife. He sat on the stool, bent his head, and with patient hands began straightening the twisted metal, cleaning off the mud, wiping it until it caught the light again. Adana watched him, her heart heavy. He didn't rush, he didn't complain. He just fixed it. When he finally placed it back in her hands, it wasn't perfect. It was scratched, bent in parts, but it was hers again. Her lips trembled. "Thank you," she whispered. Sei said nothing, but his eyes said everything. That night, Adana sat by the flickering oil lamp, the bracelet in her hands. She traced the crooked edges with trembling fingers. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. All her life she had been robbed of love, of family, of dignity, and now Bissy had tried to rob her of the last piece of her parents. She muffled her sobs into her wrapper. She thought Sei was asleep, but then she felt his presence beside her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to stop her tears. Instead, he placed a wooden cup of warm tea beside her. Adana blinked at it. No one had ever comforted her before. No one had ever noticed her pain enough to sit quietly and simply be there. Her fingers brushed his as she took the cup. His warmth was steady, unshakable. Her voice trembled. "Sei, do you think I'll ever be happy?" He looked at her for a long moment, then slowly reached out, tucking a strand of her rough hair behind her ear. "You will," he said softly. Because you're stronger than you think. Her chest ached. She wanted to believe him so badly. The next day, as she scrubbed clothes by the riverbank, a cruel laugh stabbed her ears. She looked up and her blood ran cold. Madame Kedji. She was draped in fine wrappers, gold bracelets jingling on her arms, a face painted with wealth and wickedness. She looked at Adana with disgust that could curdle milk. I see marriage hasn't changed you, she sneered. Still the same filthy, pitiful wretch. Adana bit her tongue, focusing on her washing, but Madame Kedji stepped closer, lowering her voice into venom. You think you're suffering now? My dear, this is only the rehearsal. No one, hear me well, no one will ever truly love a girl like you. Not Shay, not anyone. Adana's breath caught. The words sliced deeper than knives. Madame Kedji's lips twisted into a cruel smile. Then she turned and walked away, her gold clinking as if mocking Adana's bare wrists. Adana didn't see Shay in the distance, watching. She didn't see his fists clench so tight his knuckles went white. She didn't see the storm brewing in his eyes. But that night, as she curled into herself on the mat, shaking from her stepmother's venom, she felt Shay quietly lay a blanket over her. When she turned, he simply said, "She's wrong." And somehow, for the first time, Madame Kedji's curse didn't feel so heavy. Because Shay's presence made the load lighter. Days passed, and something between them shifted. Shay no longer felt like a stranger. They began sitting outside together, watching the stars. One night, Adana whispered, "Do you ever wish things were different?" Shay turned to her, expression unreadable. "Different how?" She hesitated. "Do you ever wish you married someone else? Someone who deserved you?" His jaw tightened. "Don't say that." "It's true," she whispered. "I was thrown away. Given to you like I was nothing." He reached for her hand, his touch firm, grounding. His voice was quiet but fierce. "You are not nothing. You are everything." Her heart stopped. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that. She stared at him, truly stared, and for the first time, she wondered, who was this man she had married? Why did he carry himself like someone far greater than the poor fisherman the village mocked? That night, she lay awake, replaying his words over and over. "You are everything." And for the first time in her life, Adana dared to think maybe, just maybe, she was. The next morning, as she bent low sweeping the sandy compound with the ragged broom, a shadow blocked her light. She looked up and nearly dropped the broom. It was Bisi, but not the Bisi she used to fight over Gary with. No, this one was decorated like a masquerade on festival day. Her wrapper glittered like it had been stolen from the palace of a queen, gold bangles jingling on her arms, head ties standing high like a tower. Her face? Painted so much it looked like she bathed in powder. "Ah, Adana," Bisi sang, smiling sweetly but her eyes sharp enough to cut. "See your life, sweeping sand like a slave. So marriage has reduced you to this?" Adana's grip on the broom tightened. She wanted to fling it in Bisi's face, but instead she straightened up, wiping sweat from her forehead. "What do you want, Bisi?" Bisi's smile widened, dripping with fake pity. "Oh, nothing. I only came to remind you. Did you really think you belonged with us? Please, Mama and I only kept you around because it made us look generous. Like, oh, see us, the Holy Family, feeding a pitiful orphan. But you were never family. You were a project, a showpiece, something to polish and keep in one corner." The words stabbed deeper than knives. Adana had always suspected it, but hearing it aloud, in BC's mocking tone, felt like poison in her veins. BC stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Did you truly believe someone like you could ever deserve love, or respect, or a good life? Look at you, an orphan, discarded like dirty rag, now married to a limping fisherman. This is exactly where you belong. Mud, sand, and shame." Adana swallowed the lump in her throat. The old Adana would have burst into tears, begging for mercy. But today was different. Slowly, she lifted her head and met BC's eyes. "I may be poor," she said quietly, "but I am not broken." For the first time in her life, she saw BC's smirk falter. It was small, but enough. BC clicked her tongue loudly and turned, her heavy bangles jingling as she walked away like a peacock. Adana's heart pounded. Her hands shook, but inside, something new burned, a fire she had never felt before. For once, she did not feel like a helpless beggar girl, and deep down, she knew Shay had something to do with that. Afterwards, Adana sat outside the hut, pretending to pick dirt from the cassava bowl, but her eyes were fixed on Shay. He was repairing an old basket, his hands steady, his face calm like he carried the whole world and still refused to complain. She hesitated, then blurted out, "Shay, why did you marry me?" Sei paused, the basket in his hands, and looked up at her. His eyes searched her face, then he said simply, "Because I wanted to." Adana frowned, her chest tightening. "But just because I was forced on you." Sei sighed deeply, putting the basket aside. "And you think you were the only one forced?" Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" Sei looked away, staring at the darkening sky, as though choosing his words carefully. Then he turned back to her. His eyes, usually calm, now carried a storm. "Adana, things are not always what they seem." A chill raced down her spine. What was he hiding? She whispered, almost afraid of the answer. "Who are you? Really?" Sei didn't reply immediately. He dropped the basket completely, stood up and dusted his hands. Then he met her gaze head on. "Do you really want to know?" Her throat went dry, but she nodded. "Follow me," he said. Adana followed him through the narrow, winding paths of the village. The sun was sinking, throwing long, creepy shadows across the ground. She didn't dare ask questions. Her legs were moving faster than her mind could think. After what felt like forever, Sei stopped in front of a massive black iron gate. Adana froze. She blinked hard, thinking her eyes were deceiving her. But no, it was real. This wasn't the gate of a fisherman. This was the gate of a palace. Her lips trembled. "Sei, what is this?" Without a word, he pushed the gate open. Inside was a compound so large it could swallow 10 villages. Tall palm trees lined the driveway, golden lamps lit the path, and a grand house towered in the middle, glowing like the moon. Adana's heart nearly stopped. "This," Sei said softly, "is my home." Her knees weakened. "You're what? But you're poor." A crooked smile appeared on his lips. "No, Adana. I only wanted people to think I was poor." Spun. Everything she thought she knew shattered. "Why?" she whispered, her voice shaking. He walked ahead into the mansion, and she followed like a ghost. The rugs inside were thick enough to bury her feet. Golden chairs carved with strange patterns lined the walls, and everywhere she turned glistened with wealth. Adana stared at him, her voice breaking. "Why did you hide this from me?" Shay finally turned, his eyes dark with something she couldn't read. "Because I needed to know who truly loved me. I was tired of women who only saw my money." Adana's breath caught. Her stomach churned. So this whole suffering, the hunger, the cold nights, the shame, had been part of a test. "You let me believe we had nothing," she said, tears spilling. "You watched me cry myself to sleep. You watched me suffer. All because you wanted to test me?" "Adana, I didn't do it to hurt you," Shay said quickly. "But you did," she snapped, her voice breaking. "You did hurt me, and you enjoyed it. Do you even know what it feels like to be treated as trash all your life? Then to marry a man who lies to your face?" Shay's eyes softened. He reached for her hands. "I love you, Adana." She let out a bitter laugh, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Then why didn't you tell me sooner? Why let me drown in pain?" Shay's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I was afraid." Adana closed her eyes. Her heart was heavy. She didn't know what hurt more, the truth itself, or the fact that he had hidden it from her for so long. She turned away, her voice trembling. "I need time." And for the first time since their marriage, Adana walked away from him. Her heart pounded with every step. She didn't know where she was going, but one thing was certain. She had to leave. Her bare feet pounded the marble steps of the mansion like a prisoner running from chains. Past the glittering garden that mocked her with its beauty, past the iron gates that once locked her pain inside, Adana's chest rose and fell like a storm. Her throat was tight, but tears still poured freely, blinding her path. "How could he?" Her voice broke into the empty night. "How could she do this to me?" She had starved, sweated, bent her back like a slave, believed every lie that they were nothing. She had swallowed insults, carried shame like her daily bread, while all along he was sitting on wealth big enough to feed 10 nations. "Ah, God, this is wickedness," she sobbed as her feet carried her down the lonely road. Her mind flew back to Madame Keji and Bissy, to the day that they had chased her out like rotten leftovers, to the nights she slept in a leaking hut, rainwater dripping on her face, mosquitoes buzzing in her ears, convinced her destiny was permanent suffering. And now, just when she had finally tasted peace, Shay's hidden truth came like thunder to scatter her fragile world. Before she knew it, she was standing in front of Madame Keji's house, the very place she once called home but never found love. Her fingers shook as she knocked, her knuckles trembling like they carried her whole pain. The door creaked open. Bissy stood there in her shiny wrapper, head full of coconut oil, lips painted as if poverty was allergic to her. Her eyes narrowed in confusion. Then, when she saw Adana's tear-streaked face, her mouth twisted into a wicked smirk. "Well, well," she said, leaning against the doorway. "Look who came crawling back like a hungry dog." Adana's lips parted. "Bissy, I just needed—" "Needed what?" Bissy snapped, folding her arms. "Rice? Shelter? Or maybe a reminder that you don't belong here?" Adana clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Her voice broke. "I never belonged here, did I?" Bissy's smile stretched wider, sharp as a knife. "Finally, the bush goat has grown sense." Adana turned to leave, her dignity trying to drag her away, but Bissy's next words sliced through the air. "If I heard about that, your husband," she said with a mocking laugh. "The poor little man they forced you to marry is borrowing money to feed you. Tufiakwa! Imagine suffering and still marrying suffering." Adana froze, anger boiling inside her. If only Bissy knew. If only she knew Sheyi wasn't just a poor man, but richer than all the men Bissy had ever oiled her hair for. For a split second, Adana wanted to spit the truth in her face, scatter that smug grin, and watch it burn. But then, she breathed. Bissy didn't deserve to know, not yet. So she straightened her back, wiped her tears, and faced her with calm eyes. "You're right," Adana said, her voice steady. "I was forced to marry him." Bissy's grin deepened, satisfied like a hyena seeing blood. "But do you know one thing, Bissy?" Adana's voice sharpened and she stepped closer. Her eye fierce. For the first time in my life, I was loved. The smile fell off Bissy's face. And I would rather sleep with a poor man who loves me, Adana whispered, than in a house full of people who never did. Bissy's face darkened, like the moon hiding behind clouds. Her hands tightened, her chest heaving with rage. Adana turned and walked away, her heart still aching, but her spirit burning stronger than ever. The cool night carried her back to the mansion. She didn't want to see Shehi, didn't want to hear his voice, but as she stepped through the gates, there he was, standing in the dim light, waiting like a man on trial. Adana, he breathed, rushing forward, worry stamped all over his face. Where did you go? She looked away. I needed to think. And what did you decide? His voice cracked like a boy begging not to be flogged. Adana's throat tightened. I don't know. Sheyi rubbed his forehead, guilt weighing him down. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted someone who loved me for me, not for my world. Her laugh came bitter, broken. And what about me, Sheyi? Did you ever think of me? Of the nights I cried myself to sleep believing I was doomed to suffering, when all along it was just your test? Pain flashed in Sheyi's eyes. I thought about it. Every time I saw you suffer, I wanted to confess. But I was afraid you would hate me. Adana let out a shaky breath. She did hate him, but she also loved him. She had seen his patience, his gentleness, even when he had nothing to gain. But could love cover a wound so deep? He took her hands, his voice desperate. Adana, please, don't leave me. Her eyes filled with tears. Was this man her healing or her ruin? Meanwhile, in the village, gossip moved faster than fire. Madame Kedges sat outside peeling cassava, grumbling as usual. When two women passed by whispering, Have you heard? One leaned in, excitement dripping from her voice. Heard what? That Sheyi, Adana's husband. That man is not poor, he is a billionaire. The knife slipped from Madame Kedges' hand. What did you say? Yes now. Lands, cars, businesses, mansions, everything. The girl is sitting on money like Yamban. Madame Kedges' eyes bulged. The air left her lungs. Her whole body trembled. So all this time she had mocked Adana, spat on her name, laughed at her suffering, and now she found out the useless goat was married to a man who could buy the whole village and still not blink. Her heart thudded in her chest. She thought of Bisi. She thought of how she had forced Adana out for her. She thought of how they had celebrated when Sheyi married Adana, thinking he was a poor man. And now it turned out that the very thing she threw away was gold. Madame Kedges' nose flared. Over my dead body, she roared, slamming her fist into the ground. That night she gathered the bitter ones, the envious ones, the troublemakers who loved to see people dragged down. Her compound filled with whispers like snakes in the dark. We cannot allow that girl to sit on wealth while we suffer, Madame Kedges hissed. One man smirked, rubbing his stick. So what's the plan? Her eyes gleamed like a vulture. We march to that mansion. We break her pride. We show her she does not belong there. The crowd murmured in wicked agreement. Tomorrow, they would strike. By the next evening, the sky turned blood red as the sun sank. A mob stormed towards Sheyi's mansion, dust rising under their feet, sticks and stones in hand, eyes burning with envy. And at the front, Madame Kedges, wrapper tied like a warrior, face twisted with rage, screamed at the top of her lungs. Adana, come out! Come out, you ungrateful child! You think you can enjoy wealth while we rot? Not when I am still alive! Her voice cracked through the air like thunder, shaking the gates of the mansion. Adana and Seyi sat opposite each other, enjoying roasted chicken and wine. For the first time in years, Adana felt peace. She lifted her glass, smiling softly. But then, a screech ripped through the air outside. A woman's voice, sharp and bitter like rusted iron. "Adana!" The fork slipped from Adana's fingers. Her heart tightened. She knew that voice. That venom, Madame Keji. Her so-called mother, the woman who had fed her insults instead of food and curses instead of comfort. Adana's hands shook. Seyi noticed. His jaw tightened as he stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow over the table. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice steady but dangerous. Adana shook her head, forcing herself up. "No, Seyi, I've run long enough. If it's her, I need to face her." Seiyi's eyes softened for a moment, but he nodded. Together they walked out. Outside, chaos brewed. A crowd of villagers had gathered at the gates, led by none other than Madame Keji. Her wrapper loose around her waist, her eyes spitting fire. Bisi, her precious daughter, stood beside her, arms crossed, pouting like a spoiled princess. The moment Madame Keji's eyes landed on Adana, standing tall in her beautiful outfit, skin glowing like someone who now slept on king-sized beds and ate meals cooked by professional chefs, she nearly choked on her own rage. "You shameless ingrate!" Madame Keji shrieked, pointing a crooked finger. "You stole what was meant for Bisi! Look at you, walking around in gold while my real daughter suffers!" The villagers murmured, whispering, eyes darting between the old witch and the couple. Adana flinched, but before she could speak, Seyi stepped forward, his voice cracked like thunder. "Enough!" The crowd fell silent. This was not the weak man they had mocked years ago. This was Seyi, the man who had clawed his way to respect, wealth, and power. He glared at Madame Keji, his voice calm but laced with steel. "How dare you come to my house and insult my wife? My wife Adana belongs by my side, and if you or anyone else dares to lift a finger against her, God help you, because I won't show mercy in my anger." The villagers shifted uneasily. The mighty Madame Keji suddenly looked small, weak. The mask of authority she had worn all her life was cracking, but Madame Keji, stubborn as ever, hissed. "She doesn't belong here. She is not one of us. She—" Seyi stepped so close she stumbled back. His eyes burned. "Adana belongs more here than you ever will. You've lost, Madame Keji. Accept it." The words hit harder than any slap. The crowd began to whisper, some even shaking their heads in shame. Their plan to humiliate Adana had collapsed. Slowly, they began to scatter, muttering as they left. Madame Keji's face drained of colour. For the first time in her life, she was powerless. Seyi was too strong, too rich, too respected. She had been defeated. Adana's eyes filled with tears. She turned to Seyi, her voice trembling. "You stood for me." He cupped her face, his touch gentle. "I will always stand for you, Adana. Nobody will ever hurt you again." Adana broke down, her sobs muffled in his chest. For years, she had been nothing but a burden, tossed around like trash. But now she belonged. She was safe. She was loved. That night, in her crumbling house, Madame Keji lay flat on her raffia mat, staring at the leaking ceiling. Her body felt heavy, her soul empty. She had lost. Instead of Bisi living like a queen in a mansion, eating food she couldn't even pronounce, it was Adana, the girl she had despised, the girl she had treated worse than a stray dog. Tears rolled down Madame Keji's wrinkled cheeks. Had she been wrong all along? "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Bisi should have married him. Bisi was the real daughter." But deep inside, an uncomfortable truth gnawed at her chest. Adana had never wronged her. The girl had only wanted love, family, a place to belong. And she, Madame Keji, had crushed all of that. She turned to Bisi. sitting at the corner, folding her arms with a bitter scowl. "This is your fault, Mama," Bissy spat. "If you hadn't forced Adana to marry that man, maybe I could have had him." Madame Kedji froze. For the first time, she saw it, the greed burning in her daughter's eyes. She had raised Bissy to be just like her, selfish, bitter, hungry for wealth without lifting a finger. Now she was reaping what she sowed, but it was too late. Shei had chosen Adana, and nothing could change that. Days later, a letter arrived. Madame Kedji's hands trembled as she tore it open. "Mama Kedji, I know you never loved me. I know you never wanted me. But despite everything, I do not hate you. I have a new life now. A life full of love and happiness. Shei is a good man. He takes care of me. I lack nothing. I wish things had been different between us. I wish you had seen me as your daughter. But I refuse to live in the past. I have chosen joy over pain. And Mama, I forgive you. Adana." The letter slipped from her hands. Her chest heaved. Forgiveness? From the girl she had broken? She buried her face in her palms, weeping. She didn't deserve it. But Adana had given it anyway. That realization shattered her completely. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Adana stood by the window, the morning sun lighting her face. Shei wrapped his arms around her waist, kissing her temple. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" he asked. Adana nodded, whispering, "I sent her a letter. I don't know if she'll ever accept me as her daughter, but I had to let her know. I hold no grudge." Shei turned her to face him. His eyes shone with admiration. "You have the purest heart, Adana. That's why I love you." She smiled, resting her head on his chest. For years she had begged for love. Now she had it. Not from Madame Kedji, but from Shei. And that was enough. Months passed. Their love blossomed. They travelled, laughed, built a home together. Adana was no longer the rejected girl. She was now a woman, cherished beyond measure. One evening, as they strolled through their lush garden, Shei stopped. "I have one last surprise for you." Adana raised an eyebrow, half smiling. "Another one? What are you plotting now?" Shei chuckled, then dropped to one knee. He pulled out a small velvet box. Adana gasped. Inside was a diamond ring that sparkled like stars. "We started with a forced marriage," Shei said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to marry you properly this time. Will you marry me again? Not by force, but by choice?" Tears blurred Adana's vision. Her lips trembled. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. This was love. This was home. This was happiness. And finally, it was hers. Hello, beloved viewers. Sometimes the ones you trust most will betray you, just like Madame Kedji and Bisi did to Adana. But hear me, rejection is not your ending. Adana turned her pain into strength, and today she is living the life they tried to steal from her. Besties, don't let anyone's hatred define you. Your past cannot stop your future. Hold on, keep fighting, and never give up on yourself. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And tell me in the comments, what lesson did you learn from Adana's journey? Bye for now!